stuck in the position of having a store but no one to run it.
Yes, and my mother worked in the store for a while, and a man and his brother came along who wanted to buy it. My mother was very happy to sell it. And she and I worked in the store with them a while, and a wife of one of the men. And they learned the business from us, as it were. And we helped them out on busy days, on payroll days. But I guess I told you, anytime I saw two young men come into the store together, I would immediately go out the rear door. I couldn't stand it because I was so frightened. It was pretty awful. I was only 15, and I was at an age where that really affected me. I was very fond of my father. He was an immigrant who had read a lot, and he was very interested in astronomy. And we used to sit on the front porch on a rocker, and I'd always be in his lap, and my brother would be beside us, and he would explain all the constellations to us. He knew all the stars. It was wonderful.
It is wonderful, and I have the feeling that you picked up your enthusiasm for teaching things to young people from that kind of a family background.
Well, I enjoyed teaching very much. I wanted to I really wanted to be either a pediatric or surgical nurse, but I ended up being a school teacher, and I liked it very much. I liked teaching the little ones.
How long did you teach here in Champaign?
Yeah, I taught 7 years at Washington School, 4 years half-time and 3 years full-time.
That was after you got your degree.
Yes.
And
then,
I take it that changed your circumstances substantially.
Oh, yes, it helped a lot, because by that time, we were having children who were just about ready to go to college, and it took 2 salaries to send them to college.
You told me that the difference in salary between that of the teacher with a teaching certificate,
yes,
which is what you had for the
and
first
with a degree was a big difference.
Made a big difference.
Yeah.
So suddenly the salary
Yeah.
went up. Well, then you taught 7 years there.
And then I taught 4 years at Busey School kindergarten.
Kindergarten.
Yes, Champaign instituted kindergartens in the system in 1962.
That's really late. I had a kindergarten in 49 in Pennsylvania.
Well, I went to kindergarten in Canton, Ohio in 1920.
Good heavens. We were a little slow.
Yes.
But you said teaching was exhausting, Mary. I suspect that it was because of the way you went about it.
Well, it was exhausting for me because the children, so many of the children were so ill-prepared that it took an awful lot of work to, after all, these children had to learn to read. And it was hard, that was hard work.
You told me when we had lunch the other day that there were occasions when a substantial fraction of what you were taking home in the way of money went back into books and
That's
things
right. Well,
for your children.
And socks and mittens.
There is a constant theme that emerges as I talk to people on this program, and that is that if you really love doing something, you do it. And the resources sort of follow the need.
Yes.
I mean, after all, you wanted to teach. Well, you needed to teach to support a husband. But then when you discovered the students needed books, that also was a need, and your salary got plowed back into that. Not long ago, Judy Warmbier was on my program, and all of her earnings as an employee of the Humane Society get plowed back into the animals that she rescues and tries to place with people. Bruce Hannon was a graduate student with a wife and children when he came back to the university and had no intention of getting involved in anything except finishing his degree, but ended up devoting countless thousands of hours to the Allerton Park effort, even though it might have stretched out his degree. I think the thing I'm discovering is that that the differences that you make are as much in your own mind as they are out in the world. And you're going to make them regardless of what the common sense of living a life comes down to being. Well, you got out of teaching then after a number of years of doing that, and you didn't just go and do a garden, although you do a garden.
Oh, yeah. Well, Lynn does the garden. He's the gardener. Well, in '66, I left teaching when Lynn became head of the English department because there was a lot of socializing, a lot of entertaining for me to do for the staff. We had an enormous staff in the English department.
That's a big department.
Yes. And I had a house to keep. I had, in '66, I guess the children were gone. There were 2 were out of college and 1 was still in college in '66. And so I came home and stayed home and did what a administrator's wife should do in a department. I entertained a lot because there was a lot to do. A lot of
And that,
graduate
you know,
students.
people don't appreciate the importance of that. In a community like this, as big as it is, not only are all the members of the department, not only do they need to know each other and work together as a team and find out what their common interests are, and new people need to be welcomed into the community, but these are also opportunities to find people in other departments, introduce them, get a little bit of
That's right.
cross-cultural flow going. I think it's a genuine talent, in fact, a calling, that a number of women especially, but also men in this community have had over the years. Wheeler Loomis and his wife are famous
Yes.
for having helped integrate disciplines, finding people from the sciences and the humanities and bringing them together.
Yes.
And I don't want to go by this role of hostess with anyone with the notion that it was mindless cocktail chatter.
No.
Some of the richest things that happen on university communities happen in gracious homes. So I personally appreciate that role very much. Many of the people I know here were far from physics, which was my field, and I never would have met them if it hadn't been for hostesses.
Yes, yes.
All right. You know, it's hard to believe, but we only have a couple minutes left. This hour has gone so fast I can't believe it, and we are barely up to now. So we have to say in just a few minutes what you've been doing with the Democratic Party, what you've been doing with your church, what you've been doing with all the other things, Mary Altenbernd, that you have your fingers in.
Well, I'm not doing much with the Democratic Party, I guess maybe because I've been disillusioned the last year or two, but I do support good causes in the Democratic Party. And in my church, I support the church, and I'm active in the Women's Alliance of the church. As a matter of fact, I'm the coordinator last year and this year.
And you told me you were president this last year of the university faculty?
No, I'm going to be program chairman this coming year in the club, the Women's Club of the University of Illinois, and president-elect for the following year.
For the following year. Okay. So, and how many members are there in that organization?
Well, there were over 500 last year. I think maybe, perhaps over 600. It's an enormous organization, and we have some wonderful programs.
Well, I think the thing that we've been exploring tonight is a life, of course, but this is the kind of life that we've got to remember is lived by hundreds of people without whom we can't run a community. Mary, you've done some things for pay, you've done some things as a volunteer, sometimes the same things.
Yes.
As you mentioned, you've been a secretary, you've been paid to be a secretary, but you've also been a volunteer sometimes for the same organizations.
Yes.
You've been a teacher, you have been the woman who made her husband's role possible at the role of administrator. You know, I was very profoundly affected about 10 years ago by a book entitled The Gift Relationship, From Human Blood to Social Policy. It happened to be about blood donation. It was a cross-cultural study of those things. But in that book, Richard Titmuss, who is probably the intellectual father of the English National Health Service, says that there are some things you can't pay a person to do, but do they need to be done. Among them is loving a child. I think we know that the people who are the best teachers, the best foster parents, are not people who do it for the money, but people who find it a calling. Often in our economy, in the world we've lived in, you've needed to do it for money, but the people who clearly have thrived on it, but then perhaps also been exhausted by it, are people like you who
Well, I've enjoyed it.
You certainly have.
Yes.
And I think that the thing we've done tonight is just quietly taken a person who a lot of us know, but who isn't a public figure, and said, this is how some women have lived their lives. And I think that in the rhetoric of women's liberation and so forth, it's worthwhile every once in a while to go back and look simply at a case and make up one's own mind about what you've been forced to do and what was fun to do.
Well, I think volunteering is great fun. You must want to do it. And I think this country is simply kept alive with women who do volunteer work. Think of the things that wouldn't be done in this community if there weren't volunteers.